the sweetheart you married the husband you expected him to be? Has the war created new problems for you in your marriage? To answer these and other personal problems brought in by your friends and neighbors,
this dramatic skyline, skyscrapers that symbolize the size and importance of the Western Hemisphere's greatest metropolis. Business and shopping streets reflect the prosperity of the city, as do the broad avenues lined with tall apartment houses and great hotels, some of them famous around the world.
With his life as a musician taking him more and more to New York City, it wasn't long before drugs were introduced into Lou Reed's life, and he started using them as a means of self-medication. This decision only put more and more of a wedge between he and his family. Lou began to withdraw. His parents were terrified of his behavior and had no idea how to confront it. Lou's sister Meryl, who later in life incidentally became a family therapist, remarked on society and the medical community's absolute failure of her family, and more broadly of all people suffering from mental health issues and neurodivergences. Never in their wildest dreams would they have spoken back to their parents, let alone yelled at them or disobeyed them or acted out against them. And they were told by many doctors from an early age a lot of conflicting knowledge that led Lou to this situation in his life. They were offered a solution, a cure that would help Lou control his behavior.
There are a number of cases in which irreversible changes in memory or other unfortunate changes in the neurologic picture have occurred. I think they're uncommon at serious level. Perhaps 2/3 of patients 6 months to a year after ECT will complain of frequent memory complaints. They may be trivial, but that there's something different.
They feel that the brain represents the soul, and therefore represents the total personality, and any operation on the brain that would alter the person's thoughts or emotions must almost be like suicide to that person.
Lou's recovery from the ECT treatment that he undertook was difficult, and it took almost a year. The trauma that he experienced by this decision that was made by his parents would be lasting. It would inform his personality for the rest of his life. But Lou did recover. He started playing music again, and he returned to school, Syracuse University. And if you can believe it, Lou Reed's first chosen major was journalism.
I don't like journalists.
Journalists?
Oh, I despise them.
Why?
They're disgusting. With the exception of you. With the exception of you. Mainly the English. They're pigs. Yeah.
So after his first year, Lou apparently realized that journalism was sent from hell, and he transferred around from program to program, drama, filmmaking, and eventually landed in English literature. It was here that he met a professor who would change his life, Professor Delmore Schwartz, who was a published author and philosopher who zealously gave lectures to open crowds at pubs all night. It was here where Lou learned to drink, but it was also where he learned to think critically.
The person I looked up to the most was Delmore Schwartz. I studied poetry with him, but there were other things, these astonishing little essays and short stories. I was amazed that someone could do that with such simple, everyday language.
He was entranced by Schwartz, and the two became very close friends. Before Lou finished school and left for New York City to go become a rock star, Schwartz gave him a warning that would stick with Lou for the rest of his life. I'm going to be leaving for a world far better than this soon, but I want you to know that if you ever sell out and go to work for Madison Avenue or write junk, I will haunt you.
Lou Reed was also a poet. He was in the literary program at Syracuse under a man named Delmore Schwartz, who is immortalized in the Velvet Underground album track, The European Son of Delmore Schwartz. Schwartz was, as they often are, one of those wild, barroom, shocking poets, Lou Reed studied under him seriously, and at one point actually wrote him a letter saying, well, I've decided to go into music. I've come to New York and I've gotten a job writing songs.
Delmore Schwartz would take his last breath in July 1966, at the very same time that the Velvet Underground were recording their first album. After graduating university, Lou went looking for jobs in either music or as a writer. What he found was a position as a professional songwriter with Pickwick Records, kind of an off-brand version of the Brill Building. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door that eventually led Lou Reed almost directly to John Cale and the Velvet Underground. One of the songs that Lou wrote during this era was a joke song that was meant to make fun of all the ridiculous dance songs that had come out at the time. It was called The Ostrich, and he invited a group of studio musicians to record the song under the name The Primitives. The single did pretty well, all things considered, and the heads of Pickwick wanted to create a real group called The Primitives with Lou to tour the song live. So they went to Greenwich Village to find some kind of beat-looking musicians, and they met two guys named Tony Conrad and John Cale. John Cale was born in a small town in Wales in 1942 and found that he was gifted at music from a young age. He moved to the United States in 1963 in pursuit of making real music and was fortunate enough to work with some incredibly influential individuals in the avant-garde scene, like the famous John Cage and Lamonte Young. John became associated with a genre of music called drone music, a kind of music that was categorized for the use of continuous single tones. When John Cale was introduced to Lou Reed and the rest of the Primitives, he was excited to have a fun little pop group side project. When the group dissolved after the single Flatline, John was hired on at Pickwick Records. Soon Lou Reed and John Cale were connecting over music and drugs. They started busking together in the streets of Harlem, going by names like the Warlocks and the Falling Spikes. They split from Pickwick Records and added two new members of the group, Sterling Morrison, a talented guitar player who Lou knew through friends at college, and Angus MacLeese, a percussionist and friend of John Cale, who also played with Lamonte Young. So one day they're walking down the street and they spot a book laying on the sidewalk, a paperback chronicling the investigation of subversive paraphernalia in the USA from 1963. The book was called The Velvet Underground, and it was Angus MacLeese who suggested that they take the name for their band. Angus didn't stick around too long after that, though, considering himself more of a serious artist than a rock and roller. So he quit, leaving a space open for Maureen Tucker, Mo, the little sister of a college friend of Lou and Sterling, who had a very unique playing style. Lou loved it, and the classic Velvet Underground lineup was born.
We're sponsoring a new band. It's called The Velvet Underground. Since I don't really believe in painting anymore, I thought it would be a nice way of combining, and we have this chance to combine music and art and films all together, and we're sort of working on that, and kind of the biggest discotheque in the world.
The Velvet Underground were discovered by Andy Warhol through a mutual friend, Barbara Rubin, a regular at Andy's factory. Her interest in the Velvets spread through Andy's crew. So he and the superstars, Paul Morrissey, Gerard Malanga, all went down to the Café Bazaar and saw the Velvet Underground playing live. By the end of the evening, Andy Warhol had taken the band under his wing, and the next day, he was their new manager. There are so many negative things that you could say about Andy Warhol and his factory of creativity dipped in sin. Some of the characters that came from that era were devastating, and it's been suggested, with probably a lot of truth, that he was the main cause. Warhol was a person who saw the hypocrisy of the world, saw all the rules that society put in front of us to live by, and he actively tried to dismantle those rules from the ground up. If something was thought of as a faux pas, Andy sought to embrace it, even when it sometimes meant a total disregard for human emotion and the negative consequences of manipulating vulnerable people. It was a lesson that Andy Warhol would, of course, learn a couple of years later when one of his former hangers-on, Valerie Solanas, walked into his studio and opened fire, shooting Andy in the chest twice.
Really, he was something else. He was very strong, very, very strong. John and I were talking about how mentally strong he was.
Yeah.
John had felt after the shooting that, he'd been physically hurt, but mentally he was still very, very tough.
This was in '68, right?
Yeah.
Then one of the people that worked with him, Valerie Solanas.
Yeah.
You think that really had such a major effect on his life?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he'd been warned about it. Everybody, there'd always were these crazy people running in and out. And everybody had said to him, "Hey, Andy, maybe we should get a lock on the door or something, or at least have somebody look at who comes in here first." But that was just part of it, and he paid a terrible price for that. No one knew who the Velvet Underground was, and nobody cared either.
Right.
It was we were allowed to exist doing things completely our own way because Andy Warhol was there. And that's why the Velvet Underground's first record is, in the studio, people who normally would have tried to change things didn't, because Andy said, oh, that's great. So we experienced right off the bat doing things our own way and knowing we were right and being able to do it. And the record company also never listened to our records because they couldn't stand it.
All right.
So when people would say, how do you have a record that has this on it, has that on it? Because I saw the records as an example, because I was right out of the university, an example of what you could really be writing about. Look what you could write about. You're only writing about this. Look what you could write. So it was a demonstration of a freedom of topic, sound, arrangements, approach, attitude, all in one.
Even if the band only made one album under his management, and they scarcely were a part of his circle for more than 2 years, this would be the most iconic and most well-documented time in the lifespan of the Velvet Underground. Nico was a German model whose real name was Christa Pafkin. She was from a wealthy German family who were traumatized by the war. Her father, who was conscripted into Hitler's army, would die in battle in 1942. She left Germany and eventually met Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who set her up to record her first single. When it didn't do much on the charts and her relationship with Brian fell apart, she left for New York City in pursuit of making some money as a model. But before she got the chance, she walked into a Mexican restaurant and met a strange little man called Andy Warhol. When Lou Reed agreed to have Andy Warhol manage his band, he wasn't initially aware that it would require him to allow the inclusion of another singer, a female singer. But Andy had become obsessed with the beautiful Nordic Nico and thought that her voice would suit some of the Velvet songs. Lou reluctantly agreed, and his contentious relationship with Nico began. It wasn't long before they were sleeping together, in a brief affair that would change absolutely nothing about their working relationship. Nico has claimed that she wasn't using any drugs during her time at the factory with Andy Warhol, but she was full of a kind of rage from trauma that Lou could never understand. And their relentless headbutting wore both of them down and affected their ability to work together in a band. Lou Reed talks about himself as a product of Warhol's factory. He was deeply affected by watching Andy and the way he worked and the way he conceptualized art and the way he dealt with the outside world. Andy created an insular society that made things feel okay when they were really toxic and damaging and sometimes downright psychotic. But these artists who would gather there were attracted to the place, not just to Andy's patronage, but because this place offered a sense of freedom that quite literally did not exist anywhere else.
When we met Andy, who I happen to personally like and admire, what we were doing musically fit very nicely what he was doing filmically, cinematically. Do you believe filmically? Jesus Christ. It matched what he was doing cinematically. A lot of the people he was filming that he was interested in, that he wanted to put in front of a camera, who were all amateurs. I suppose when the art world kind of meshed with reality for a while in the 60s, it was very, very interesting. But the material I was writing just fit in with it perfectly. I mean, it seemed as though I'd written it for it, or he'd filmed it for us, but it just happened to work out.
Lou Reed was endlessly inspired by these people, but also acutely aware of how skewed their perspective was. Living in this silver utopia where food and drugs were free and everybody was encouraged to sleep with everybody else. The Velvet Underground participated in Andy Warhol's ambitious tour, a project called The Exploding Plastic Inevitable, where they went to galleries and he showed his art films in the background, while the band played live and factory superstars like Edie Sedgwick and Gerard Malonga danced like junkie go-go dancers as entertainment. Drugs were so rampant and common in Andy Warhol's factory that there were characters like Bridget Berlin, who was known for just walking up to people and poking them with syringes. But they weren't the only ones. 1967 is the year that drugs became not only common, but a significant element of the counterculture lifestyle. 1967 is the year that the Beatles released Sgt. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, laden with the possible references to psychedelics. John Lennon would spend the rest of his life trying to convince people that Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was about a kid's drawing. Are You Experienced, the Jimi Hendrix album that exploded in the underground, asks questions like, have you been experienced? And makes statements like, excuse me while I kiss the sky. Yet, the music still comes with a disclaimer. Not necessarily stoned, but beautiful. Because even if it seemed like everybody was doing it and everybody was talking about it, in order to sneak their music into the mainstream, artists still had to hide their drug references in metaphors and analogies and double talk. Lou Reed's music was never very mainstream. So the same year that both Purple Haze and Day in the Life came out, the Velvet Underground would release The Velvet Underground and Nico, and approach the subject of substance abuse in such a blasé, factual way that the songs were guaranteed to never be played on any radio station. The two songs that I think are the most significant in this regard are kind of what I consider to be sister songs. They both represent the stark realities of life as a drug addict. First is I'm Waiting for the Man. It's Lou Reed telling the story of going to buy heroin in Harlem, Lexington and 125th Street for $26, which was about $200-ish today. He describes the feeling of not belonging in this area and being very aware of it, to the point where he straightens up his language and acts proper as soon as someone from there approaches him. At the beginning of the song, he's feeling sick and dirty. By the end, he's feeling so good, you know he's gonna work it on out. But the ending is so perfect. There's urgency. There's a feeling of there is no tomorrow. And then there's Heroin, a song so pure in its description and projection of the deep darkness that comes with addiction, but its title almost feels like it's going to be a dictionary entry. It's like Lou Reed sat down and thought about every possible angle that you could think about a drug addiction, and it begins appropriately. I don't know where I'm going. Mo Tucker's drums make this song almost as much as Lou's lyrics. Like an inconsistent heartbeat, it keeps going faster and faster and then slower, setting the tone for a kind of altered sense of time. There's a panic that comes with the rapid speed at which the rate changes. The big decision is to nullify his life, remove himself from the life he once had, from family, from friends, from existence in normal day-to-day society. And it's almost like you don't even know why that's relevant to say. The decision seems to have long since been made.
I know just where I'm going.
Without all of the musical ambience that the instrumentation provides, Heroin sounds almost like a folk song, a diary entry, a glimpse into the personal experience of one man and his drug of choice. Nothing speaks more to the perfection of the Reed-Cale partnership than the ability to illustrate through music the depth of feeling that Lou Reed's lyrics so bluntly express. They take the listener for a walk around the mind of the user, the screeching and screaming of the viola facing off against the banging tinny guitar.
But Heroin as a song and as a work of art, to me, is one of our more perfect American songs, because it addresses a very conflicting subject, a subject, that has so many stigmas attached to it. It addresses all of the deeply painful and destructive elements of it, and also whatever is precious about it in one piece, in a non-judgmental piece, in a non-preaching piece, and just with, again, Lou's such beautiful, simple, direct language. I wish that I was born 1,000 years ago. I wish that I had sailed the darkened seas on a great big clipper ship. I mean, it's just like any boy's dream. I mean, it's like any part of him that was going through conflict, pain about what he was doing, about the drug itself, about his life. For a moment of beautiful clarity, he expressed the boy's dream.